Welcome to our YouTube video on Azure DevOps interview questions and answers. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting your journey in the world of DevOps, this video is designed to help you prepare for your next Azure DevOps interview. We'll cover a range of common questions and provide in-depth answers to ensure you're well-equipped to ace your interview. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of Azure DevOps interview readiness. This is the part 1. What is Azure DevOps? Answer: Azure DevOps is a set of development tools and services provided by Microsoft to help organizations plan, develop, test, and deliver software more efficiently. It includes services for version control, build automation, release management, project management, and more. Azure DevOps helps teams collaborate and manage the entire software development lifecycle. Explain the key components of Azure DevOps. Answer: Azure DevOps consists of the following key components. Azure Boards. This component is used for tracking work items, managing project backlogs, and planning sprints. Azure Repos. Azure Repos provides version control services, including Git and Team Foundation Version Control (TFVC). Azure Pipelines. Azure Pipelines offers continuous integration and continuous delivery (CI/CD) capabilities to automate the build and deployment processes. Azure Test Plans. It is used for managing and tracking test cases, executing tests, and analyzing test results. Azure Artifacts. This component helps manage and publish package dependencies, such as NuGet, NPM, and Maven packages. What is the difference between Git and TFVC in Azure DevOps? Answer: Git and Team Foundation Version Control (TFVC) are two version control systems in Azure DevOps. The key differences are: Git uses a distributed version control system, offers flexibility, allows for branching and merging easily, and is well suited for open source projects and modern development workflows. TFVC uses a centralized version control system, which is more rigid in terms of branching and merging, and it's better suited for organizations with legacy code bases and specific compliance requirements. Explain the concept of continuous integration (CI) and continuous deployment (CD) in Azure DevOps. Answer: Continuous integration (CI/CD) is the practice of automatically integrating code changes from multiple developers into a shared repository multiple times a day. In Azure DevOps, this is achieved using Azure pipelines to build and test code automatically when changes are pushed to the repository, ensuring that new code doesn't introduce integration issues. Continuous deployment (CD/CD) is the process of automatically deploying code to various environments, example, development, staging, production, after it passes automated tests and quality checks. Azure DevOps pipelines can be configured to automate the deployment process, ensuring that code is consistently deployed and tested across different environments. How do you create a CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps? Answer: To create a CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps, follow these steps. Define your code repository and create a new Azure DevOps project if you haven't already. Navigate to the Pipelines section in Azure DevOps. Click on New Pipeline and select your source control repository, example, Git, TFVC. Configure the pipeline by specifying the build and release stages, defining tasks, and setting up triggers. Use YAML or Visual Designer to define the pipeline steps. Save and run the pipeline, which will automatically build, test, and deploy your application. What is YAML in Azure DevOps and how is it used for defining pipelines? Answer: YAML, yet another markup language, is a human-readable data serialization format. In Azure DevOps, YAML is used to define pipelines for CI/CD. A YAML pipeline file describes the steps and tasks required to build, test, and deploy an application. It allows you to version control your pipeline configuration alongside your code, making it easy to maintain and share. What are Azure Artifacts and how do they relate to DevOps? Answer: Azure Artifacts is a component of Azure DevOps that provides package management services. It allows you to create, host, and share packages and dependencies like NuGet, NPM, and Maven packages. Azure Artifacts is valuable in DevOps as it enables teams to manage their software dependencies, ensuring that builds and releases are consistent and reproducible. Explain the difference between a build pipeline and a release pipeline in Azure DevOps. Answer: in Azure DevOps, build pipeline. A build pipeline is responsible for compiling the source code, running tests, and generating artifacts, such as executables or libraries. It ensures that your application's code is in a deployable state. The output of a build pipeline is typically used as an input to a release pipeline. Release pipeline. A release pipeline takes the output from a build pipeline and deploys it to various environments, like development, staging, and production. It manages the application's release process, including approvals and deployment gates, to ensure a smooth release into different stages. What is the significance of Azure DevOps Service Connections? Answer: Azure DevOps Service Connections are used to establish connections to external services and resources needed in your pipelines, such as Azure subscriptions, container registries, or other integrations. They allow your pipelines to securely access and interact with these external resources during the CI/CD process. How can you secure sensitive information such as connection strings and API keys in Azure DevOps pipelines? Answer: to secure sensitive information in Azure DevOps pipelines, you can use pipeline variables and secrets. Secrets are stored securely and are not exposed in logs or visible to users with restricted access. You can then reference these secrets in your pipeline tasks or scripts without exposing the actual values. Explain the concept of Azure DevOps Agent and its types. Answer: Azure DevOps agents are responsible for running tasks in build and release pipelines. There are two types of agents. Microsoft-hosted agents. These are provided and maintained by Microsoft. They are available for free, but they come with certain limitations, such as the limited set of tools and longer queue times during peak usage. Self-hosted agents. These agents are set up and maintained by the organization itself. They can be customized to include specific tools, and they provide more control over agent capacity and performance. What is the purpose of the artifacts in Azure DevOps, and how can they be used in a CI/CD pipeline? Answer: Azure Artifacts is a package management service in Azure DevOps. It allows you to create, store, and share packages and dependencies. In a CI/CD pipeline, artifacts can be used to store and retrieve artifacts, such as application packages, libraries, and Docker images. This ensures consistent and reliable artifact management during the build and release processes. What is the difference between a build trigger and a release trigger in Azure DevOps? Answer: in Azure DevOps, build trigger. A build trigger is used to automatically start a build pipeline whenever changes are pushed to the source code repository. It is essential for implementing continuous integration (CI) to ensure that code is built and tested whenever there are code changes. Release trigger. A release trigger is used to start a release pipeline when a specific event occurs, such as a successful build. It is part of the continuous deployment (CD) process and automates the deployment of code to various environments. Explain the concept of environments in Azure DevOps release pipelines. Answer: environments in Azure DevOps release pipelines represent the stages or destinations where your application will be deployed and tested. Environments can include development, staging, production, and other custom stages. They provide a structured way to manage the deployment and testing of your application across different target systems. What is the purpose of approval gates in Azure DevOps release pipelines? Answer: approval gates are used in Azure DevOps release pipelines to introduce human intervention and control into the deployment process. They ensure that the release doesn't proceed to the next environment or stage without the necessary approvals from designated stakeholders. Approval gates help maintain a balance between automation and governance in the CD process. What is the role of variables in Azure DevOps pipelines and how are they used? Answer: variables in Azure DevOps pipelines are used to store and manage values that can be used across pipeline stages and tasks. They allow you to parameterize your pipeline configuration and make it more flexible. Variables can be defined at various scopes, such as pipeline, stage, or job levels, and can be used for setting configuration values, connection strings, or any data needed during the pipeline execution. Explain how Azure DevOps supports the concept of infrastructure as code. Answer: Azure DevOps supports infrastructure as code, IAC, through services like Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates, and Terraform. You can use these templates to define and provision infrastructure resources in a repeatable and automated manner. Azure DevOps pipelines can be used to manage and version control these templates, enabling infrastructure provisioning as part of your CI/CD process. What is branching and merging in version control and why is it important in DevOps? Answer: branching and merging are essential concepts in version control systems. Branches allow developers to work on isolated sets of code without affecting the main codebase. Merging is the process of integrating changes from one branch into another. In DevOps, branching and merging are crucial for parallel development, code isolation, and maintaining a clean and stable main branch, facilitating collaboration among teams. How does Azure DevOps handle rollbacks in a release pipeline? Answer: Azure DevOps allows you to manage rollbacks by deploying a previous version of your application to a specific environment. This could be achieved by creating a new release with the desired version of the artifacts or by using environment-specific rollback strategies. Proper versioning and tagging of your artifacts are essential to facilitate rollbacks effectively. What is continuous monitoring in the context of DevOps and how does it relate to Azure DevOps? Answer: continuous monitoring in DevOps involves the ongoing collection of data and metrics from your applications and infrastructure to detect issues, identify performance bottlenecks, and ensure system reliability. Azure DevOps can integrate with monitoring and alerting tools, such as Azure Monitor and Application Insights, to provide real-time insights into your application's health and performance. What are service connections in Azure DevOps and why are they important in CI/CD pipelines? Answer: service connections in Azure DevOps are connections to external services or resources, such as cloud providers or container registries. They are important in CI/CD pipelines because they allow secure access to these services, enabling tasks like deploying to Azure resources, fetching dependencies, or interacting with external APIs while keeping sensitive credentials secure. How can you trigger a release in Azure DevOps when a new Docker image is pushed to a container registry? Answer: you can use container registry events and webhooks to trigger a release in Azure DevOps when a new Docker image is pushed. Set up a webhook on the container registry to notify Azure DevOps when a new image is pushed. In Azure DevOps, configure a release pipeline to start upon receiving the webhook notification. What is the purpose of environments and approvals in Azure DevOps release pipelines and how do they contribute to deployment orchestration? Answer: environments in Azure DevOps release pipelines represent deployment stages, such as development, testing, and production. Approvals are used to introduce manual gates in the deployment process. Together, they enable deployment orchestration by allowing you to control when and where your application is deployed and ensuring proper approvals are obtained at each stage. Explain the concept of artifact retention policies in Azure DevOps and why are they important? Answer: artifact retention policies in Azure DevOps allow you to define how long build and release artifacts are retained. They are important for managing storage costs and ensuring that older artifacts are automatically deleted, keeping your artifact storage efficient. By setting these policies, you can balance the need to preserve historical builds with the limitations of your storage capacity. How can you implement blue-green deployments or canary deployments using Azure DevOps? Answer: to implement blue-green or canary deployments in Azure DevOps, you can set up multiple environments with different configurations. During a release, you can gradually shift traffic to the new environment, canary, or quickly switch traffic between the blue and green environments. This can be accomplished using deployment strategies, feature flags, and traffic management tools integrated with Azure DevOps. What are deployment slots in the context of Azure App Service, and how can they be used in a CI/CD pipeline? Answer: deployment slots in Azure App Service are separate instances of your web application, each with its own configuration and URL. They are useful in a CI/CD pipeline for deploying and testing changes in a production-like environment without impacting the live application. By deploying to a staging slot, you can test new features or updates before promoting them to the production slot. Explain the concept of roll forward and rollback strategies in the context of Azure DevOps release pipelines. Answer: roll forward and rollback strategies are used to manage releases. Roll forward: in a roll forward strategy, you address issues or failures in a release by creating a new release with fixes or updates and deploying it. This approach moves forward with the release and resolves the issues without reverting to a previous version. Rollback: a rollback strategy involves reverting to a previous version of the application when issues or failures occur in a release. This may be necessary if a critical problem is detected in the current release, and the safest approach is to return to a known stable version. What are the best practices for securing sensitive information such as secrets and connection strings in Azure DevOps pipelines? Answer: best practices for securing sensitive information in Azure DevOps pipelines include: use Azure Key Vault or secure secrets management solution for storing secrets and connection strings. Avoid hard-coding secrets in pipeline files or scripts. Use variable groups or pipeline variables with secret masking. Implement role-based access control, RBC, to restrict access to pipeline configurations and secrets. Regularly rotate secrets and credentials. How can you integrate Azure DevOps with third-party tools and services, and why is this important in the DevOps process? Answer: integrating Azure DevOps with third-party tools and services is important for streamlining the DevOps process by automating tasks across the entire software development lifecycle, leveraging the capabilities of specialized tools for tasks such as testing, monitoring, and security, enhancing collaboration and communication within development and operations teams. Azure DevOps supports integration through REST APIs, webhooks, and extensions, allowing you to connect with a wide range of tools and services. Explain how Azure DevOps can facilitate compliance and auditability in the software development process. Answer: Azure DevOps can facilitate compliance and auditability through role-based access control, RBC, to restrict access to sensitive data, secure secrets management and access controls for sensitive information, audit logs and activity tracking to monitor changes and actions in the DevOps environment, compliance features such as work item tracking and traceability to ensure that processes are followed, integration with compliance and governance tools, including Azure Policy and Azure Blueprints. What is the purpose of multi-stage pipelines in Azure DevOps, and how do they differ from classic pipelines? Answer: multi-stage pipelines in Azure DevOps are a new way of defining CI/CD pipelines using YAML. They offer more flexibility and control over pipeline orchestration. Unlike classic pipelines, which have predefined build and release stages, multi-stage pipelines allow you to define a series of stages where each stage can contain multiple jobs. This gives you fine-grained control over your pipeline execution and supports complex workflows. Explain the concept of infrastructure as code, IAC, and how it integrates with Azure DevOps. Answer: Infrastructure as code, IAC, is the practice of managing infrastructure and configuration through code. Azure DevOps can integrate with IAC tools like Terraform and Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates. With IAC, you define infrastructure resources and configurations in code, store them in version control, and use Azure DevOps pipelines to automate their deployment and updates. What is the purpose of agent pools in Azure DevOps and how do they impact pipeline execution? Answer: Agent pools in Azure DevOps are groups of agents that can be used to run pipeline jobs. They allow you to organize and allocate agents to different projects or teams. By using agent pools, you can control the availability and capacity of agents for your pipelines and ensure that specific agents are used for particular types of workloads. Explain the concept of variable templates in Azure DevOps pipelines and how they can simplify pipeline management. Answer: Variable templates are reusable sets of variables defined in YAML files that can be shared across multiple pipelines. They simplify pipeline management by centralizing variable definitions, making it easier to maintain and update common configurations like connection strings or API keys consistently across pipelines. What are pipeline environments in Azure DevOps and how do they facilitate the release process? Answer: Pipeline environments in Azure DevOps are logical groups of resources, like VMs, databases, or containers, where your application is deployed and tested. They facilitate the release process by providing a clear separation of deployment stages and by allowing you to define specific settings, approvals, and conditions for each environment. This enables more granular control over the release process. Explain the self-hosted build agents in Azure DevOps in the scenarios in which they are beneficial. Answer: Self-hosted build agents are agents that organizations set up and maintain themselves. They are beneficial in scenarios where you require specific tools, configurations, or dependencies that are not available on Microsoft-hosted agents. You need to meet strict security or compliance requirements. You want more control over agent performance, scaling, and resource allocation. Self-hosted agents provide the flexibility to tailor your build and release environments to your exact needs. How can you ensure that Azure DevOps pipelines are resilient to failures and outages? Answer: To ensure pipeline resilience, use self-hosted agents to have control over agent infrastructure. Implement retry mechanisms in pipelines for transient failures. Set up redundant pipelines in different regions. Regularly back up your pipeline configurations and settings. Monitor pipeline health and set up alerts for issues. Implement a disaster recovery plan for your Azure DevOps environment. Explain the concept of YAML multi-stage templates in Azure DevOps and how they aid in pipeline modularization. Answer: YAML multi-stage templates in Azure DevOps allow you to define reusable pipeline templates in separate YAML files. These templates can include stages, jobs, and tasks. By using templates, you can modularize and share common pipeline configurations across different pipelines, making it easier to maintain and update complex pipeline setups. What is the purpose of deployment gates in Azure DevOps release pipelines and how can they improve deployment reliability? Answer: Deployment gates in Azure DevOps are automated checks and approvals used to ensure that a release meets specific criteria before proceeding to the next stage. These gates can include manual approvals, automated tests, and other criteria. Deployment gates improve deployment reliability by adding an extra layer of verification and ensuring that releases only progress when specific conditions are met. How can you achieve pipeline as code using Azure DevOps YAML pipelines, and what are the benefits of this approach? Answer: achieving pipeline as code involves defining your pipelines using YAML files stored in version control. The benefits of this approach include version control for pipeline configurations, code review and collaboration on pipeline changes, reproducible and shareable pipeline configurations, integration with existing development workflows. Azure DevOps YAML pipelines enable this practice and promote the same versioning and collaboration standards as code repositories. What is Azure DevOps Service Connections? How are they different from service endpoints? Answer: Azure DevOps Service Connections and service endpoints serve similar purposes, allowing connections to external services, but they have different names in different contexts. Service connections are a broader term that encompasses various types of connections. Service endpoints, specifically, are a type of service connection used to connect to services like Azure, GitHub, or Docker registries. So, while service endpoints are a specific type of service connection, service connections can also refer to other types, such as generic or Kubernetes connections. Explain the concept of pipeline as code and how it is achieved in Azure DevOps. Answer: pipeline as code involves defining your CI/CD pipelines using code, typically in YAML files, which are stored alongside your application code in version control. In Azure DevOps, this is achieved through YAML pipelines, where the entire pipeline configuration is represented as code. This code can be version controlled, reviewed, and managed just like any other source code. The benefits include better collaboration, reproducibility, and automation of pipeline management. What are deployment jobs in Azure DevOps release pipelines, and how do they impact deployment orchestration? Answer: deployment jobs in Azure DevOps release pipelines are sets of tasks and conditions that define the actions to be taken within a deployment environment. These jobs specify what needs to happen during the deployment, such as deploying code, running tests, or configuring resources. They are essential for orchestrating the deployment process, ensuring that each environment's actions are executed in a coordinated and controlled manner. How can you integrate Azure DevOps with security scanning tools to ensure code security in the CI/CD pipeline? Answer: integrating Azure DevOps with security scanning tools involves adding security checks to the pipeline. This can include static code analysis, vulnerability scanning, and security testing. You can use Azure DevOps extensions or custom scripts to run these tools as part of the pipeline. The results can be reported in Azure DevOps, allowing you to take corrective actions and ensure code security throughout the CI/CD process. What are environment security and environment approvals in Azure DevOps release pipelines, and why are they important in a CI/CD process? Answer: environment security refers to setting up access controls and permissions for the deployment environments in Azure DevOps release pipelines. Environment approvals are the mechanisms that require specific individuals or groups to approve deployments to those environments. These features are important for enforcing governance and ensuring that only authorized personnel can deploy code to different environments, maintaining security and compliance throughout the CI/CD process. Explain the role of schedules in Azure DevOps release pipelines and how they can be used to automate deployments. Answer: schedules in Azure DevOps release pipelines allow you to automate deployments at specific times or on recurring schedules. For example, you can schedule nightly builds or deployments to occur during non-business hours. This ensures that deployments happen when they are least likely to disrupt users, improving the overall deployment process. How can you ensure blue-green deployments are implemented safely in Azure DevOps, and what strategies can be used to minimize risks? Answer: to ensure the safety of blue-green deployments in Azure DevOps, consider strategies like implement feature flags to enable/disable new features. Use gradual traffic shifting to minimize user impact. Conduct thorough testing in the green environment. Monitor and collect metrics during the deployment. Be prepared for quick rollbacks if issues arise. Explain how Canary deployments work in Azure DevOps and what are the key considerations for implementing them effectively. Answer: Canary deployments involve rolling out a new version of an application to a small subset of users before deploying to the entire user base. In Azure DevOps, this could be achieved by routing a portion of user traffic to the new version. Key considerations for effective Canary deployments include selecting appropriate criteria for selecting Canary users, closely monitoring the Canary group, and having a rollback plan in case of issues. What are deployment scripts in Azure DevOps and when might you use them in your CI/CD pipelines? Answer: deployment scripts in Azure DevOps are custom scripts or automation steps used during deployment to perform specific actions. These scripts are often needed for advanced deployment scenarios, such as database schema updates, configuration changes, or other tasks that cannot be handled by built-in deployment tasks. Deployment scripts provide flexibility and extensibility in the deployment process. Explain how you can handle database schema changes as part of a CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps, especially in the context of zero downtime deployments. Answer: handling database schema changes in a CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps often involves database migration scripts in tools like Flyway, Liquibase, or Entity Framework migrations. For zero downtime deployments, you can use techniques like shadow databases, rolling deployments, or feature flags to ensure that schema changes are applied seamlessly without impacting users. Proper testing and rollback procedures are also crucial to ensure database changes are successful. Don't miss out on part 2 of our video series. It's packed with even more valuable insights and answers to Azure DevOps interview questions. If you found part 1 helpful, part 2 is a must-watch to complete your preparation.
Hey, if you like the content, please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a bite of Azure brilliance.